Welcome to the Pastor's Connection podcast, where we delve into the heart of ministry and explore the challenges and triumphs of pastoral life. Join us as we connect with inspiring leaders, share insightful stories, and equip one another with tools for effective ministry. Together, we can foster a community of support, encouragement, and growth in our calling. I am your host, Thomas Osterkamp. I lead Beachside Community Church here in Palm Coast, Florida, and help lead the Pastor's Connection Network. Today's episode is brought to you by BroTech Design. BroTech Design is your go-to destination for exceptional web design and reliable hosting solutions. They create stunning websites that captivate your audience and ensure seamless performance, helping your church or business thrive online. You can elevate your digital presence with their tailored services at BroTech Design. Contact them today at info@brotech.design for assistance and to transform your online experience. I am excited for our guest for today. We have my good friend, more than a friend, but good friend, Ryan Livingston. He's pastor of Southside Baptist Church in Sarasota, Florida. It's good to see you, Ryan. Glad to have you on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Thomas. Looking forward to it.
So today we're going to be talking about maximizing your facility for kingdom impact. But before we jump into that, I want you to kind of get a feeling for who Ryan is, family life, background. So Ryan, as we begin this conversation, can you just share a little bit about your family with us?
Sure, absolutely. I've been married for 24 years to roughly anyway. To my, I haven't been married for 24 years. My wife's going to kill me for that. We were married in 2003. 22 years, 22 years. And we've been married for 22 years now, married to my wife, Faith. We have three children. Our oldest is out of the house. She lives in Daytona area. Matter of fact, she goes to Thomas's church when she can get away to go do that. We have two that are still here at home. I have a 13-year-old and one who's about to turn 16. So we're going to have another driver on the road. So be careful down here in Florida if you're around. You don't want to smash into her.
Yeah.
But I've been pastoring for 25 years and been here in Sarasota, Bradenton area now for, 22 years now.
So you know, your oldest daughter this year moved out of the house now, going to college. How's that transition gone for you guys?
Well, she's an amazing student and an amazing young lady. And so she's done extremely, extremely well in that transition. It's more her mother and I who had the challenge, letting go of your daughter and letting her move, several hours away. I'm just grateful she's still in the state. We still get to see her, so that's a good thing. But it is definitely a challenge to begin that empty nest syndrome.
Yeah.
It won't be much longer now. We'll have two more that'll be out of the house, and that's a new stage of life. And so we're just kind of embracing the change as it comes along.
So you lead a church revitalization there at Southside, and for those that haven't led a revitalization, every capable person who can lead anything is vitally important. And I know that your family, all your family members are invested in the ministry. So how has that transition gone for your daughter who kind of helped you out with a lot of things?
Well, she started running like my media when she was 11 years old in our church plant. We've been involved in revitalization efforts pretty much my entire ministry, even from days in college, going to intern at churches and then taking a youth pastor position at churches. It's always been an uphill battle for our ministry. Seen God do some great things, but it's always been an all hands on deck kind of thing because it's always been a rejuvenation.
Yeah.
And I think really pretty much every church is in some form of rejuvenation. You need to constantly be moving towards something, constantly progressing and moving and challenging your community to come to Christ and to come and see. And so our family has, been involved in it in a lot of different ways, from every kind of aspect of the ministry to running vacuum cleaners and emptying trash cans, whatever has to be done in order to accommodate people coming to Christ.
So For those of you who don't know Ryan, I don't know a person who does what we're going to talk about today better when you talk about maximizing your facilities for kingdom impact. So I asked him to come on and have this conversation with us today to kind of give us all some ideas how we might better use our facilities in a more creative way. Um, and so, Ryan, as you kind of think about getting started into all this, what inspired your vision for using church facilities beyond Sunday services for kingdom impact?
Well, I would say that the biggest thing that kind of started me down a journey of making sure that you use your buildings in an effective way was when I started traveling as a younger person, seeing huge edifices, huge buildings that used to be filled with people and now are closed or they're only using certain parts of it or even like when we went to go visit the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London and see Spurgeon's church, that wasn't even meeting on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And you see these huge empty buildings and think to yourself, we've got to do better than this. We can't just have these challenges. And then when you get involved in rejuvenation, one of the things that you'll learn really quickly is that almost always rejuvenation efforts have a church that's too small for the size of the building that they have.
Yeah.
You'll have 20 people in a building that seats 100, or 50 people in a building that seats 400. And so you have these huge buildings that they can't maintain. There's deferred maintenance on the buildings. Roofs are collapsing. Coming here to Southside was one of the worst cases of deferred maintenance I've ever seen. Roofs were caving in. The air conditionings hadn't been addressed in years. There was rats living in just about every building. We're still trying to get rid of all that problem.
Yeah.
It was a challenge. It was a challenge, and as almost every church that you see, they had a collection of VBSs and plaque stuff and stuff that's been around for 50, 60 years that hadn't been touched. And it's just every available space was shoved with junk and with stuff, and it just wasn't usable, and it also isn't maintainable. You can't maintain a ministry with all of that deferred maintenance and all of those problems. And so as you see a building sitting like that, it becomes a huge drain financially, mentally, all those different aspects on the process of trying to rejuvenate the church because they have this massive edifice that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And so you got to figure out ways to make kingdom impact with that building every day. Where the parking lot's not empty 5 days a week, 6 days a week, but instead we're, trying to use every available tool, every available asset to be a blessing to our community, but also to be a lighthouse so that they can see that there are people here who care and are watching out for their community.
Yeah, and at Good News when we were back in Iowa and beginning that revitalization there, I felt everything you were talking about: dilapidated facilities, rooms just full of a bunch of trash and garbage that somebody thought was valuable 30 years ago and just kept storing. But even churches that are doing very well, a lot of them only use most of their facility for 2 or 3 hours a week. So how do you approach facility stewardship from a biblical perspective?
Well, thinking through the challenges of a building, you have to realize that for the vast majority of churches, their building is their biggest discipleship tool that they have at their disposal.
Yeah.
It is without a doubt one of the things that reaches into the community just about as good as anything because people can see the building. It's something that's tangible that they can be a part of. And so they see it. And you have to reflect on the fact that this was created and built. Like in my case, we're a 70-year-old church. We've had 70 years of people pouring resources and man hours and blood, sweat, and tears into this property, only for it to be used 3 hours a week.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insanity. Why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense. And so you have to come up with a biblical mindset. And a biblical mindset removes the aspect of looking at your building as just for your membership, for the convenience of your membership, and instead highlights it as for your community and for your guests. That's why the building exists. We could go back to first century church and just meet from house to house.
Yeah.
And there's churches that do that and do that very successfully in meeting house to house. And we've determined that we should build these buildings and we should gather at these buildings and these properties. And that's not all churches, obviously, but the vast majority of them do. And so they have these huge buildings, and then they forget that the whole purpose of that was for the convenience of reaching into that community. It was for having the purpose of gathering large groups of people together in a community to reach them. And then what happens is, time progresses and congregations age and, demographics change in a particular neighborhood. You start finding out that the vast majority of your congregation isn't even from your neighborhood anymore. They're driving in from 20, 30 minutes away, in city life, or as much as an hour away in some smaller cities, in order to come to this church, this building. And you don't smell like your community anymore. You don't look like your community anymore. And the hard reality that I came to was that if you cease to exist as a congregation, would your community even notice it? Would anyone even care if you disappeared other than just your membership? And that to me was a gut-wrenching question, um, that really served to kind of open my eyes to the fact that we have to build more bridges, not more walls. We need to open up doors, not secure the ones we have. We really have to partner with people in our community, not just national organizations partnerships, but local people that are in the fight, trying to reach people for our community, trying to be a blessing, trying to help the poor and the needy, the elderly, the widow, the childless father, the single mother, whoever it is. We have to reach people in our community so that we can affect our community for Christ and encourage them to come and find Christ and find a relationship with Him.
So, one of the things I often think about when it comes to facilities, I have now experience in a traditional church setting where we have our own facility. Now we meet in a local high school, we set up and tear down. And so it has me rethinking facility usage. And I often think of the parable of the talents that Jesus gave, where he said, here's 10 for you, here's 5 for you, here's 1 for you. And you have a couple of them that took what was given and they used it to maximum potential on return.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the one who just takes it and buries it and says, here, Lord, here's the one you gave me. And a lot of churches are just burying their facilities by not maximizing it to its full potential. And go
Absolutely.
ahead.
And to whom much is given, much is required, right? And so the one who received 10 talents should reap 10 talents, and the one who is a protectionalist who just buries their one in the sand, that was the wicked and slothful servant. And so we didn't want to be the wicked and slothful servant. We want to maximize both. And I think it helps too because it honors the heritage of the church. In a 70-year-old church, you're
Yeah.
saying these people did not invest so that we could sit comfortably on our laurels 70 years from now. That was not why they did this. They did this because they had a passionate pursuit of God. They wanted to reach their community for God, and to sit there and bury that is a shame. It's a waste of the investment of God's people for many, many years.
So one of the things you touched on a few minutes ago is people's mindset towards a facility is often a preservation. It's just there for the people who come.
Mhm.
So what challenges or resistance did you face when first trying to maximize facility use, and how did you overcome them?
Well, this is going to span 25 years for a couple of different reasons, but my current facility usage, um, this church has been extremely gracious in allowing me to try to build as many partnerships as possible. They saw some of those early advantages to it. Um, Finding small wins, as a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
You haven't had kids on the property in decades, and all of a sudden you have a partnership with a homeschool co-op, and now for the first time in decades, now you have 20, 30 kids running around the property. And they saw that as a small win. It wasn't a big win because they didn't all come join our church. Many of them had their own churches, but it was a small win. And so those small wins helped build momentum really quickly in my present context. In other contexts that we've had, you have all kinds of challenges to it. People say, my granddaddy built that platform, so we can't change it at all. We can't alter this room at all because this was my grandma's Sunday school classroom.
Yeah.
Um, and so, well, yeah, but nobody sits in here anymore, and so now it's just a mausoleum to the past instead of something else that could be now. Like maybe it could be a coffee shop now. Maybe it could be a community gathering place for local business people to come and to network and to hold mentoringship programs or whatever. And so you start looking at that, and you have a lot of people that want to hold on to things. In my current context here at Southside, we didn't really have that. There's people that said, I don't like that change or whatever. Sure, people would say things like that, but as a general rule, they've been very open with, hey, you know what? Let's just use what we have for God, and we might as well, right? We might as well do this.
Yeah.
But you can definitely run into people who will push back because of um, ownership. They feel like this is their church. They push back because of heritage. This is the new guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what works here. That's not how we've ever done it before. You get those types of responses when you endeavor to try to build relationships. But they can be overcome, and it really comes to the point of preaching and teaching and demonstrating and modeling the principle of that we're better together, and that if we can accomplish more for the sake of Christ, let's accomplish more for the sake of Christ.
And I think for some pastors who are listening, you're gonna basically have an idea of who's gonna have a problem with it. I mean, you get to know your congregation, you know the ones who are gonna have a problem with it, and having some one-on-one conversations with those people can go a long way in kind of smoothing out some of the issues that they might have. But I want to ask you this, Ryan, because you mentioned a second ago about having 20 or 30 kids, but they don't necessarily come on Sunday. And I know that some pastors, it's like Sunday is the day, and if they're not coming to Sunday, what's the point? Can you kind of answer that question or that objection that they might have to what's the point if they're not going to show up on Sunday?
That's a great question, and I would give it to them like this: is that we have to do our very best to reach as many people as possible in every aspect of life, which means that family may not need you right now, but they may in the future. And like right now, in any given place in Sarasota, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people who call me their pastor. Um, I'm on their phone. They have my cell phone number. And when they go through a hard time, they call me. And they don't attend my church. They don't come every week. They don't give in the offering. They don't this, that, that. But because it's part of some program or some outreach or something that I partnered with them in doing over the last decade, where they said, this guy really cares about me and he loves me like Jesus did. And when the rubber hits the road, when their life begins to go through turmoil, their marriage is in trouble, their kids misbehaving, they're financially they're distraught because they lost a house or a job or something like that, then they turn to you. And what I want them to turn to, I want them to turn to me. I want them to turn to somewhere where they're going to hear the gospel, and
Yeah.
where the gospel can restore them and change them and bring them into a right relationship with God. And so, yes, it can be a little bit of a long game. It can be a little bit of we're investing, we're planting seeds, and others are watering, like Paul said. But you have to trust that God's going to give the increase to that, and to just keep sowing seed and planting and watering and trusting that God's going to ultimately be the gardener who takes care of all of that.
Well, and one of the things that you talked about was thinking of your facility as a discipleship tool. And I would challenge these pastors to consider, are you trying to disciple and see people saved and disciple them, or are you trying to build a Sunday service? Like,
Mhm.
what is the major focus? So one of the things you've been great at is, partnerships with local organizations or ministries. So can you kind of give an idea to our listeners of, the people you're partnering with, what those partnerships look like, whether it's during the week or on Sunday? What are you guys doing?
First, let me comment on what you just said. Is so unbelievably true. Is that as you begin to reevaluate your building as this discipleship tool, whether you're a national pastor in Zimbabwe, and you have a lean-to building on the edge of town, people recognize that it is a church's presence in the community and that their
Yeah.
church is there. And so when you maximize that facility and you use it however it is, it reminds me of a mission trip where we did a medical clinic in a small church that maybe sat 40 people. And we had 200, 300 people line up for this medical clinic. And the doctor on call that day was me because the doctor didn't show up. And
Oh,
so and so I had like five suitcases that we went to Walgreens before we left and we just like shoved junk off the shelf into these suitcases.
yeah.
And then, people would come up and be like, I've got these burns, I've got these whatever. And we're just throwing, over the counter medication and burn creams and wound wrapping and all this kind of stuff to these people. Um, they knew that they could come to the church for help. It isn't a matter of, having some huge or fancy program. It's a matter of connecting the building to Christ and to your mission. Your building communicates your mission just as much as your messaging does. And if your building is closed and empty 7 days or 6 days a week and only open for a few hours on Sunday, the messages you're communicating is this is a social club for us four and no more, and you're not really welcome here.
Wow, you're right.
And so we don't want to communicate that. We want the doors to be open, constantly having different groups. So you asked which creative ones have we had on the property lately. Saturday we have Safe Coalition coming and doing a fair for recent adopted children.
Oh, wow.
So if you've had an adoption in the last 6 months or whatever, they're going to have a party for those families, bounce houses, all that kind of stuff. And so they're coming to our property for that. We're not charging them anything for that. It's just an outreach from our church and a partner church that we have.
Cool.
It's just us saying welcome. There is a community orchestra that is everybody from 16, or I guess there's probably some younger than that. There's probably some 13, 14-year-olds in there, all the way to there was an 80-year-old bass player in this community orchestra that just used their facilities a few weeks ago for a concert. And they came on the property. They were here for 24 hours or so. They set up the auditorium the way they needed it, and we didn't charge them anything for it. I think they gave us a love offering, $150 or something to cover lights or whatever. But just a way for us to communicate into our community that we care. Since that event, we've been tagged in their um, stuff that they've been doing as a partner for several weeks now. And our engagement on our church's page and our engagement in our community has gone up because of partnering with a community orchestra, and just being willing
Cool.
to open the doors to that. And they didn't play, gospel music. They came in and played classical and, played some stuff from the recent movie Wicked and, stuff like that. But, and I never even asked what they were going to play. I just said, hey, listen, you have this coming. We'd like to help and we'd like to partner with you in that. I mentioned community groups earlier. You have homeschool groups. We've had probably 4 or 5 different homeschool groups use our facility over the years. We've also partnered with businesses. And so, like, for example, we had a really nasty parking lot when I came. It hurt me the first month I was here. Within 2 weeks, we had a 97-year-old World War II vet fell on our parking lot because our
Oh,
parking lot was crumbling and
geez.
the lighting was bad. And so, as a new pastor, like I was heartbroken, to
Worst case scenario, right? One of your
yeah.
parishioners
Well,
falling and hurting
and
themselves.
he's a deacon. He was a sweetheart of a guy, just a genuinely nice guy, a vet. It crossed all the heart tick buckets, right? And so I'm like, I've got to
Yeah.
pay for a parking lot. And you're looking at, $20,000 in problem at least in a parking lot our size, to dealing with that. And so a few weeks later, I was in a parking lot not far from here, and I saw a trailer that was parked in the parking lot of an abandoned mall. And so I contacted the company and I said, "Are you paying for that parking lot?" And they said, "Yeah, we're paying $500 a month to park there once a month." And I said, "Well, why don't you come and park at my place? I'll cut you down to 250 and you can park. I'm a block away, and you can come park in our parking lot." And so he came and he parked in our parking lot, in one section, and we started taking that $250 a month and socking it away. And after about 2 or 3 years, we had enough money to repave the parking lot, and some more money came in, and a company volunteered to give us a really reduced rate. We were able to redo our parking lot with this gentleman who was just running a medical trailer in our parking lot, and
Excellent.
became friends with the guy. He no longer um, uses our parking lot. Now that we have a nice parking lot, he doesn't use it anymore. But he still occasionally sends checks to the church to help us out because we helped him out when he needed it.
Wow.
And so, it's just looking for ways to not just partner with other ministries, which is great. There's a secular ministry here in our area called Mothers Helping Mothers, and they constantly are overrun with donations of clothes. They can't process them. They don't have enough people, enough space. And so I'll take my truck down there and I'll back my truck up to the Mothers Helping Mothers, and they'll empty their storage into the back of my truck of clothes. I'll drive it down here to our church. I'll get our church people to come out and we separate them all out. We go through and throw away things that can't be given away or whatever, dirty or filthy or whatever. And then we
Yeah.
have a Saturday clothing giveaway. And just for 4 hours, we open the doors and tell people to come in and take what they need and take as
Nice.
much as they need. And, we ask for an email address when they come in. And then my little church that was a rejuvenation, it was, struggling to survive. And now we have a mailing list that has somewhere around 700 families on it that we advertise to for Easter and for events and things like that. So, that's a secular, not Christian-based ministry that we can partner with, and they consider us friends, and we consider them friends, and we're working together to try to solve a problem of the cost of clothing being high and sending kids back to school, or the kids growing out of stuff by the middle of the school year and needing to get clothes. And so it's just a way to inexpensively use the space that you have to accomplish something kingdom focused, kingdom oriented, through partnerships with other people, and opening those doors.
Um, so let's talk some of the Sunday partnerships, because obviously you guys have your worship time where you're using your facility, but there's a good portion of the day where you don't have anything going on for your church, and you have partnered currently and in the past with other churches. Um, Give us a little bit of insight on that and your thought process about it.
So we have a large Hispanic population here in Sarasota, and my initial goal was to start a Spanish church service of some type. And while I was at a pastor's connection meeting, um, I met a Spanish pastor who had started his church out of our ministry. It was a ministry of our church, and they had broken off to become an independent church. And he told me that they're about to lose their building. They're about 30 days out from losing their space to worship. And I said, well, let me clear your plate right now from all your anxiety and tell you you can come meet with us, immediately at no cost. Just you're going to come, you're going to meet with us. And we'll do that for a month or two, and then we'll sit down and we'll talk about what that looks like going forward. Um, After the month or two, just to see, if we are able to work together, if we, can mesh and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so they came for 2 months, and after about a month, they said, "Pastor, we love it here, and we'd love to stay as long as you let us stay here." And so that was 8 years ago, and they still come and they meet every week, and they're part of our family now.
Yeah.
Their pastor doesn't answer to me in any way, shape, or form, but when we have work days, they come and help. When we do things, they're right there with us. When we do a luncheon or something after a service, we go ahead and prepare twice as much so that we can take care of the Spanish church after, and we stay in fellowship with them. So they've really become part of our church. And then about a year ago, another local church that was a church plant, they were, I think at the time, and they're just about to celebrate their fourth anniversary. Um, their host church that they were meeting at was about to raise their rent to an ungodly amount. And they were really kind of running out of space where they were at anyway. And so we asked them about whether or not they would be interested in partnering. Originally, it was just going to be a service, like they were going to host one service, like they were going to have a service there and then a service here. And then eventually that kind of fell through and they just decided they were going to do just the service here.
Yeah.
And so we began partnering with that church. And so now, like on a Sunday at 9:15, we began a service in our main worship center and on our in our kids areas for this other church, this church plant. And then our adult Bible study is meeting at the same time in another building. And then at 10:45, we move into the worship center, and the Spanish church starts meeting in some of our study space. And then at 12, the Spanish church moves into the auditorium, and they have their service. So we now have three services that are meeting on Sunday morning. One modern service with this church plant, one blended more like mine, and then a Spanish church that meets after us. And we have over the years even had some Ukrainian believers that have met for a short period of time and wanted to have a service. They just haven't really launched that church yet. We've had the local Haitian church that has an auditorium, but they have no fellowship hall space. They use our fellowship hall probably 4 or 5 times a year. So by the time you add up all of these partnerships with all these different churches, we're kind of touching every demographic in our area that you can,
Yeah.
um, in one facility and using those facilities for all these different demographics.
Well, and what I love about that mindset is you're not concerned about just building your own kingdom at Southside, where it's got to be Southside Spanish and Southside Ukrainian and Southside Haitian and Southside whatever. It's no, we're preaching the gospel. We're trying to reach our community, and we can do that together. So let me
And
ask
there
you
it
this. No,
comes
go
that
ahead.
does come that comes with some challenges because we don't rent to those other ministries. We partner with them and we ask them to help, with utilities and things like that. But I'm not renting the facilities to these other churches. Now, that doesn't. I don't begrudge a pastor who chooses to go that direction.
Yeah.
I think that's fine, and I think it's probably wise of you to do that. We chose to go the direction of just partnering because we were in a desperate situation as far as when we started this 10 years ago, 9 years ago, of, we can't sustain what we're doing with the people that we have. And so let's use what resources we do have for the honor and glory of the Lord. And when we took on, like, for example, the church plant, we could not afford to send out a church planter. We didn't have enough people to divide off our congregation and start another church, but we know we should be involved in church planting. And that was just a way for us to support and be involved in church planting by assisting a church plant. So there are some financial challenges to it, but also there's the benefit to the kingdom of God. And if you make it about the kingdom of God and less about building your own kingdom, I think it's doable.
Um, and I love that mindset. So sitting back and kind of looking and evaluating things, how do you measure the spiritual and practical impact of your facility usage?
The spiritual aspect of it, I think can come when brethren dwell together, there is unity. And so when you feel a sense of unity among the missions of all the different partnerships that you're doing, where people are supporting one another, then I think you found yourself a spiritually healthy position. If there is animosity and if there's competition, then that's a spiritually dark place to be, and I wouldn't want to be there. Um, Spiritually speaking, I would hope that we would see people being saved. That's the foundation of why we're here. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief, and I agree, right? I'm right up there at the
Yeah.
top.
Yeah.
But that's why he's here. And so we ought to see people coming to know Jesus. We ought to see people being baptized, and not just, church member transfers, not just, growth numerically, but people making life changing decisions on your property, whether it's in your children's programs or whether it's in your teen programs, whether it's in your church partners, whether it's in your ethnic churches, wherever it is. We ought to see some spiritual change that's happening. We ought to see a spirit of unity, a spirit of prayer, a spirit that encourages one another towards Christ. These are things that I think would help measure the spiritual impact. The practical impact comes more from a standpoint of where did you start and where are you headed and are you getting there? Are we seeing progress? Sometimes a partnership doesn't progress the way you want it to. Um, some of our um, some of our homeschool groups, for example, um, were great partners for several years, and then they needed more space or more time that we weren't able to give them, and so
Yeah.
they had to go find other facilities, other places, whatever. And that's okay. That's fine because it
Yep.
was never about building our kingdom to begin with. And so there's no hurt feelings, no hard feelings or anything. You just say, okay, well, that was great for that season, and now it's time for a new season. And what does the Lord have for us next? And if it was never about kingdom building in the first place for yourself, but kingdom building for Christ, then the practical aspect I think works out as long as you're making progress towards the goals that God's put on your heart to do. And my goal for Southside is that every available inch of building space that we have and a property that we have is maximized for the glory of God, and will be here 75 years from now for the fifth generation of pastors coming down after me, that they are reaching people in the Southgate community of Sarasota, Florida. As if that's what happens, then I will measure that as a success, and that we have continued to be an influence in our community. We've continued to reach people for the cause of Christ, however that be, whether it's in our services or whether it's in, a homeless ministry, whether it's in addictions ministry, whether it's in whoever, as long as people are coming into Christ and we're affecting our community for the gospel.
And I think that's one of the things that can be key as well, helping your people to see the fruit for the investment in the property. It's like, okay, well, in the first service, our church plant that meets here, they had this many people saved and this many people baptized and this many people added to the church. This happened in the Spanish church, this many people saved. And you may have people who are like, well, I mean, but that's not our church. It's not our service. No, but we invested our facility in seeing those lives transformed and helping them to connect those dots can get more buy-in, I think, as well.
There's a phrase I heard on a podcast not that long ago. Okay, maybe it's been a long time ago. It was a Rainer on Leadership podcast, and he was talking about the building. He said sometimes our buildings are too big because they were built for a time and a methodology that's no longer current, or for a demographic that's no longer currently in our society or whatever. Because what begins to happen is the tail is wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail.
Yeah.
And the host was asking him what he meant by that, and he says the building's the tail, right? It's a symptom, it's a sign of what's happening inside, but it shouldn't be the function of the entire process. Your
Yeah.
mission should be driving, right? And if the building is such a focus, that it is draining you and pulling you away from the mission because it's too big, or not effectively being used or sitting empty and all these different things, then you have the tail wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail.
Mm.
And you gotta refocus on the mission and looking at the building as not the mission, but as a tool or a instrument to accomplish the mission. And how can we effectively do that?
So let's talk just a second to the pastor who feels limited by the size or condition of their facility. What are some things that you would tell them and encourage them to do creatively to rethink the space and how they might use it?
Um, Creatively speaking, first of all, I think one of the things we have to understand is we have to do the best we can with what we have.
Yep.
Don't compare yourself to the church down the street. There's nothing good about that. I look at things all the time, and I was in a church just 2 days ago for my kids' Christian school that they go to. They're doing a play, and they have this beautiful lobby that has like 85 lounge chairs in it for people to sit in after the service and just chat. And I'm like, I could fit maybe 8 in my lobby, like,
Yeah.
and even then it'd be super crowded. It'd be super crowded. And I was
Yeah.
looking, I was like, man, I would really love a space like this, right? I would love a space like this. But then jealousy seeps in, and then, well, and then just, it's negative. It doesn't help you at all. So do the best you can with what you have. Number two is always look to multi-purpose. Um, the days of building a building to accommodate the whole church in a single service may be gone forever. That may be gone forever. Um, and I think that's probably a good thing. That way we don't have 10,000 seat auditoriums being built that hold, 25 people on a
Yeah.
weekend. Uh,
Yeah.
it's insanity. And so rethink your spaces um, for the purpose of multi use. I am not against pews by any stretch of the imagination. But in our culture and context of what we have today and what we're talking about with the cost per square foot of building, with the challenges of just keeping the air and the water and the lights on and all that, um, pews limit you in what you can use the space for. And so, practically speaking, chairs might be a better option.
Yeah.
If you can get away with it with the codes in your county or whatever. Why? Because it allows you to rethink the space for multi-purpose use,
Yeah.
as opposed to just um, that instead of just necessity of just, well, these is just the way the room's gonna have to be.
Yeah.
There's a pastor friend of mine in St. Petersburg who needed a new auditorium. His church had outgrown the facility they were in, and instead of building an auditorium, he built a gymnasium. And he does tear down and set up every Saturday.
Wow.
And the reason why he does tear down and set up every Saturday is because he knew that he would get more use out of the gymnasium than he would the auditorium.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, he has a Christian school that they opened right around the time they started building that. They do dinners in there and all kinds of functions. Um, he still runs a bus ministry. They bring their bus ministry into that main room on Wednesdays instead of Sundays, and they have a wide open area for the kids to play, and then have their teaching times and all these kind of things. And it's a pretty large church. I mean, in today's standard, it would be considered at least medium to large church. And instead of building an auditorium, he built a gymnasium auditorium so that he could use the multi-use. And I think that that's the thought process we have to have is not necessarily, I need to build a bigger building as much as it is, I need to find ways to use what I currently have to the best of my ability. And, understand that sometimes things are not going to be perfect. Sometimes there's a building that I have sitting
Yeah.
on my property right now that I need about $250,000 for in order to get up and running. And I don't have that money right now. And so it's currently sitting, waiting for the day when the Lord opens that door. And as soon as that door opens, we're going to put partners in all of those rooms every day of the week,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
try to find ways to fill it as best we can. Whether it's a missions focused coffee shop or multi-purpose office use, or one of the most recent things that we did, the modern church that we have that comes and partners with us, they took an old Sunday school classroom and built it out into a podcast studio, and they're allowing people to use it to record podcasts, even if it's, a podcast about college football or something else that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they can go in there and record those podcasts in that room, and they can use that room frequently for the purpose of podcast, but also it can be used for church ministry, for my church and for their church and for Spanish church, anybody else who wants to use it. We have this available podcast studio, but it's also available in our
Nice.
community if people want to come and record their podcast there. And it's a professional setup, and we invested the time and money to do it right. And so you can find ways to build bridges and open doors instead of lock doors and enclose the campus.
Yeah, and I like your advice to encourage them to maximize their facility because I think too often we as pastors can have the magic bullet mindset when it comes to facility that if I just had this facility, then everything would go, you know.
I watched a church in Hungary feed like 400 people on a Saturday, and that church could not have sat more than 25, 30 people.
Hmm.
And I mean, they were running them in one door and out the other. It was like a production line, and they were serving their community in this little tiny room. And I thought to myself, in America, we wouldn't have even tried it. We would have said, "Oh, my building's too small. I can't accomplish that. There's not enough." But I think that if you can quantify and measure the scope of your ministry and effectiveness in man's terms, then you're probably not really reaching and doing what God wants you to do, because
Yeah.
He's a God of the impossible, not of the God of that which can be quantified, what can be read in metrics. And I like metrics as much as I'm a nerd when it comes to that stuff. But really, we should be seeing God move in a faith way, in
Yeah.
big ways, instead of just what can be quantified. And so just dare to dream big and see that property, whatever it is that you have. If you've got a quarter acre and a mobile home sitting on that property, let's find a way to maximize that 900 square foot mobile home for the cause of Christ. Let's use the parking lot. Let's do a community car wash, or let's do oil changes for single mothers, or whatever it is that we can do to try to maximize that property. If you've got 65 acres and a 10,000 seat auditorium, find ways to partner. Call your local school district and say, "Hey, listen, I know you've been renting the convention center for your graduations. You could use our auditorium for that. That'd be fine." Find ways
Yeah.
to partner whatever it is that you have to use that facility for your community to know the doors are open, and it'll help that crowd. There's always a crowd of people. It never ceases to amaze me that they'll walk into a church and go, "I really thought God was going to strike me down with lightning because I
Yeah.
walked in here." And if you can get them in your door and they go, "Hey, you know what? God isn't angry with me,"
Yeah.
then you can tell them, in the book of Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all the letters of Paul, he started with a two-word answer for how God felt about all those churches. God's message was grace and peace. God is not at war with you. God is not
Yeah.
upset with you. And if you can get them on the property and you can communicate that message that God is not at war with them, God loves them and desires to have a relationship with them, and his message to them is grace and peace, that they can have a right relationship with God. They can be righteous before God because of Jesus Christ. If you can communicate that to them, it'll make all the difference in the world to them.
Yeah.
But you have to open that door somehow. That door has to be opened. So,
So if people want to continue this conversation, I have some questions for you. Where's the best way that they can reach you?
well, the easiest way is probably through Facebook. It's pretty easy to find me on Facebook. It's Reverend Ryan Livingston. So facebook.com, REV Ryan Livingston. That's the easiest way you can reach out to me. It's a public profile, so you can message me if you want there. You can reach out through our church's website, southsidesarasota.com. That they'll get that to me as well. Just give me a number and I'll call you or text you from with my cell phone number. That way we can chat. And maybe you just need to pray. Maybe you just want someone to help you evaluate your property. Myself and other guys that I know would be happy to take a look at your Google Earth, of your property. A couple of pictures. We could probably make some suggestions to you relatively quickly. That's a lot of what I do came from people saying, "Hey, why don't you do this? Hey, why don't you do this?" So, um, that's where a lot of those ideas came from. So reach out and feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to sit and talk with you, and we can do a Zoom call or whatever you need to in order to accomplish that.
And you can reach us here at the Pastors Connection Network by going to pastorsconnectionnetwork.com or finding us on Facebook at Pastors Connection Network. Thank you so much, Ryan, for your time. We appreciate you being on the show and talking about facility impact here.
Hey man, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate what you guys are trying to do with the Pastors Connection Network and reaching out to pastors, being an encouragement and a blessing in challenging times to help us and motivate us to reach people for the cause of Christ. And I'm excited about it. Thank you, preacher.
Thank you for joining us on the Pastors Connection podcast. May you be inspired and equipped to lead with grace and purpose until we meet again.